We're on the tee box for the beginning of the fall Grand Zoom series. We're excited to have Stephen Proctor with us tonight. He was kind enough to be with us in our GHS national convention, and he did a marvelous job. So I would just like to say to you that we had a very wonderful time as a group. The GHS is on the rise. We're having wonderful success with program enhancements. I really think that the value of GHS membership is elevating. And so we're hopeful that you'll invite your friends, because we'll have any number of different opportunities around the variety and the diversity of interest in the game of golf. So I want to hand it off to James Kaiser, who happens to be our Region 5 director. James lives in Kentucky, and he represents the state of Kentucky, Ohio, and Michigan in the Golf Heritage Society. And they have robust hickory golf, and soon they're going to have robust classic golf as well. And James, without further ado, lead us on, brother.
Well, I just humbled and honored to be here today, and I've surrounded myself with all of my hickory things that mean a lot to me, because that's all I play. All I play is Tommy Morris Jr. style golf with gutta percha balls and smooth. I got my smooth face cleek here, my long nose driver, and the tournaments, the 3 tournaments I try to play each year that are all pre-1900 golf. So it's just an honor to get to interview Stephen Proctor, who's just a fantastic author. He wrote a book that I devoured. I mean, I met him at the show, and he signed my book, and it's called Monarch of the Green. And if you don't have your copy, I would encourage you to get this. But Stephen's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he's worked at a lot of different newspapers, and he definitely has a gift of being able to chronicle everything he writes about and backs it up with fact. And I've just had a marvelous week chatting back and forth with him on email about some of the things that I'm passionate about. I have the old Tom Morris scrapbook, and a lot of the things that he referenced. He told me to buy a book by Horace Hutchinson to talk about the great classic golf swings of the day. One of the most fascinating things that we're going to get into that I'll just share with you before we get started, but he was telling me that Freddy Tate, who's a famous golfer, and I'll let him get into it, but this is his swing sequence. So this is about as close, we think, as what Tommy Morris Jr. swing was, with the shorter backswing and the ferocious follow through. And I just, and I even have a Google Earth diagram that I did based upon a Prestwick drawing that the Prestwick people had sent us. But Google Earth, the original 12 holes that Tommy and his dad both won 4 championships on this course. And just if you don't know a lot about Tommy Morris Jr., you're going to learn a lot here in this call. But Stephen, thank you so much for being on the call, and welcome to the fall series Zoom call.
Really happy to be here. I had a nice time at the convention, as I said a little earlier, and really enjoyed every person I've met from GHS. I've enjoyed very much. And so I look forward to talking with you tonight, James, and also hoping there were a lot of questions from the gallery. That's the fun part at the end. So
absolutely. Well, first of all, let's get into it. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in the whole subject of Tommy Morris Jr. and the Morris family?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Toward the end of my career in journalism, as I mentioned, I was focusing on doing literary storytelling and things. The internet disruption of the business model of the newspaper began to make it virtually impossible to do the kind of work that made me interested in staying in the game. And I could kind of see that as early as about 2002 or so, that there was no way I was going to be able to get to 65 as a happy journalist. And so I started to make maybe plans to retire early and do something different. And I started reading golf history with the idea that I had been a major in history in college, in addition to journalism. I always loved history, and of course I loved golf. So I thought I'll just read a lot of golf history and see if there's a story there that strikes me as worth telling. And of course, anybody that starts reading a lot of golf history suddenly feels absolutely compelled to go and visit St. Andrews. And so I did that. Got really lucky because a friend and I, a person who is my right-hand person in journalism, and that we had worked together for many years, we just put our names in that lottery that opens up on the third Wednesday of September every year. And, you know, you can sign up for a tee time the following year at St. Andrews. So we were lucky to get selected and got a tee time on a Monday morning, which was perfect. And then we were there on Sunday and strolling around the town. And of course, we went to the Cathedral Cemetery, and there I saw the statue of Tommy. And it was really struck me very deeply standing in front of that statue and looking at it. And by then I'd read a fair amount of golf history, not anything like what I have read now, but I had read a lot. And, you know, the inscription lets you know that 60 golf societies contributed to the erection of the monument. And it was already pretty aware then that that was about every single society that would have existed at the time that young Tommy died in 1875. And so, you know, it just was a question for me is, what did this guy do to earn this distinction in a cemetery where the luminaries of St. Andrews have been buried for centuries? His tomb is by far the biggest tomb in the entire cemetery. I mean, you can see it from almost any vantage point across the cemetery anywhere. And it dwarfs Alan Robertson's, for instance. And obviously, those of you who know a lot about golf history know that Alan Robertson was the very first great professional of St. Andrews and one of the key figures in the early evolution of golf. And so it just made me I felt like for certain there was a great story there, and I set about telling it then. Now, you got to keep in mind that for almost all of the years that this book was worked on, I was also either the managing editor or one of the very top editors of a newspaper, which is a job that takes a lot of your day almost every day. So it was a question in the beginning of pecking away at reading, pecking away at research, and so forth. But that's how I ended up setting out to do the tale.
That's awesome. It's fascinating. I've been to that cemetery myself, and gives me goosebumps, especially when David Joy goes in there and does his rendition of Old Tom, and he goes face to face with Alan Robertson. I mean, just talking about it gives me goosebumps watching him reenact that kind of stuff. So I know exactly where you're coming from. So in your opinion, where would golf be today without a Tommy Morris Jr.? And also, if you could follow that up with where would it be without the gutta percha ball? I mean, do you think we'd be anywhere near where we are today if those two discoveries hadn't come on and Tommy hadn't come on as a genius of golf?
Well, those two things are deeply interrelated to start with. You know, I would say this: games disappear all the time, stick and ball games in particular. As you know, the very ancient history of golf shows it evolving from various kinds of stick and ball games in different countries: France, Holland, even Italy. Some people think China. But the point is, those stick and ball games came and they either evolved or they went. And golf might have had that same fate. The long game of golf as we know it today. I love the way David Hamilton of St. Andrews describes it, the long game. And that's the difference that differentiates from very much other stick and ball games. In any case, Tommy came along at a very critical moment when the future of the game was a little bit uncertain at that time. There was decline in certain centers, in particular Edinburgh. But it was the introduction of the gutty ball really that was the securing thing. The two biggest developments in the history of the game, in my personal opinion, are both related to the ball. The introduction of the gutty ball in the 1840s, late 1840s, and the introduction of the rubber cord ball right at the turn of the century. Those two things are the things that shaped the whole future of the game. When the gutty ball came along, obviously it came along at a time when Tommy was just getting to be of playing age. The ball was first in wide use probably around 1850. Tommy was born the next year. By the time he was 13, he was a superstar golfer. So, in that 10 years, the Gutty supplanted the feathery and was just really taking absolutely firm hold as Tommy was coming of age. And of course, what the game really needed at that particular moment was a giant superstar to get the game moving forward, in particular, to help spread the game places other than Scotland if it was going to have a future of the sort that we think of today. So I think it's doubtful whether golf would have gotten as big as it is had Tommy not come along. But, the ball itself is the real thing, and perhaps something else that introduced thousands of people to the game. And even without Tommy, it might have gradually spread, probably much slower. When you think about it, it only took 50 years from the Gutty before golf became a worldwide game, which is a pretty extraordinary thing when you think about it. At the time the Gutty was introduced, guys were still walking around in red coats, and there were probably not 3,000 golfers in the world. So to see it go worldwide like that in 50 years is the rise of Tommy plays a big part in that, but probably the ball would have been enough.
Those are, I've never even really thought about it that way in terms of how the game would have how it would have evolved or not. I just really appreciate those comments. I think to go along with that and correlate along with that, I'll ask a follow-up question on that. The fact of how good he was, especially in his matches of the profound excellence of golf with Davy Strath. They had the London, the people in London, the bettors, the people that were running the books and running the money, really accelerated that whole movement of what you just described profoundly. Because when a lot of your research and a lot of the reason you were probably even able to write the book the way you wrote the book, with all the chronological order of it, was determined, I think, based upon the fact that all that money was flowing in and all those writers that they were sending in because of all the people that were spending all that money coming out of London up there, as well as what was going on in Scotland. But it really wasn't it really the London push of all that money coming in, and then that forced the writers to get up there to write about it so that you would have the content of information that you have?
That is a big part of it, James. And here's how things unfold. I think it's wise to keep in mind that gambling is and always has been the lifeblood of golf. There was no such thing as a match that took place at St. Andrews or the Honorable Company or anywhere else where a crown or a half crown wasn't on the line, and it was mostly written down. The bigger clubs had bet books, okay? They were called bet books. And there was a bet recorder who had a job in the club, almost like club secretary, where at dinner, when everybody was enjoying their 5th or 6th or 7th claret, and they were making boastful challenges, there would be matches set for the next time the group got together, and they would be recorded in the bet book, and it would be a way of guaranteeing that the loser paid, and also just a recording of the activity in the club. And those bet books are quite fascinating to look at. So money has always been involved in it from the beginning. Obviously, the early challenge matches were often for outlandish stakes. The match in 1849 between Old Tom and Allen versus Jamie and Willie Dunn of Musselburgh was for 200 pounds sterling a side, which that was 4 times Tom Morris's annual salary when he was hired later by the Royal and Ancient, riding on a single match. It was wealthy gentlemen betting against each other, putting their professionals up, and their professionals are playing for a stake. So money has always been involved in it. When the Open came along, gamblers outside of, first off, newspapers outside of Scotland first wrote about golf when the Open Championship happened, because it was a national championship, and that helped bring attention to it in a way that club matches and individual matches ordinarily did not get. And when that happened, London gamblers started being interested in betting on it because it was an interesting proposition. And then, of course, after a long quest to try to win the belt, which on a couple occasions there was people got close. In 1863, Tom had a chance to win it, having won in 1861 and 1862, and maybe the history of golf goes a different way, but he didn't win it. And it was a 10-year quest that Tommy ended when he claimed the belt. And that was the thing that really catapulted golf into a higher stratosphere in terms of coverage in the national press, both in Scotland, but more importantly and particularly outside of Scotland. And part of what happened as he went up to that was that Tommy went on training tours, as it were. He had relatives at Hoylake. His Uncle Jack, his father's nephew Jack was the professional at Hoylake for many, many years. And old Tom's brother George had laid the golf course out with Robert Chambers when it opened in 1869. So they had a lot of family ties there. And he would go down there and play, and also at Royal North Devon, possibly at Blackheath, depending on where his travels took him. And as he went through, that gave the English their first sight of a big superstar, and really started to help golf grow south of the border. And so in that way, Tommy's victory in the Open Championship starts to move the game outside of Scotland. And as you said, matches later make it even more popular all over.
It's interesting that you talk about the whole subject, because I've always felt in today's game that betting aspect seems, besides the fact of the matches going on, at the country clubs and the clubs and the inner stuff, there's not anybody writing about betting matches. And Bryson DeChambeau is now a sponsor for the Kings something or other, the legalized betting. And I just wonder if that's going to catapult slingshot golf to another level from the 36 million golfers we have here in the U.S. to an even higher number, because now we're embracing the betting side like they did back then. We'll do it again. I mean, we have Calcuttas and we have those kind of things, but they're kind of like, it's almost like, oh, it's hush hush, we can't talk about that, and nobody's writing about it, nobody's talking about it. But Bryson is basically saying, no, I'm going to endorse these people, and I'm going to wear their logo on my hat. And I just wonder if it's going to, create some new excitement, even more so than they have, because they've kind of transferred the money to giving to charities and giving to, things of that nature, as a 501c3, the PGA Tour. And I wonder if which is a good thing, but I just wonder if we have that and we have legalized betting and it's promoted, and I wonder if they'll start writing more about that kind of stuff, because I know for a fact people like Justin Thomas, who's a friend of mine, is basically, he, as a kid, he was betting his dad at age $5 a hole. And that's what got his juices going.
I would say that, I don't see betting hurting golf per se. Betting is, like I say, when Tommy played a match, I would say that the match that put things over the top in terms of golf becoming a popular spectator sport in Britain is the one that took place in 1873. Two of them, actually, 108-hole matches between Davey and Tommy. And the golf was just exceptional. It was best golf that had been seen to St. Andrews in that date, and I think for many dates afterwards too. Davey won the first match, Tommy won the second. So there was a lot of excitement there. And the amount of money bet on that match was extraordinary. 1,200 pounds sterling is known to have been bet, which at that time is just an extraordinary sum of money, well into the hundreds of thousands equivalency modern times. And, 600 pounds of that was bet in the city of Liverpool alone, which goes to show you how strong Tommy's ties to Hoylake and the interest of Englishmen had become even by that year, 1873, which is, 4 years after the founding of Hoylake, and just the sort of nascent period of the explosion of golf in England that followed the rise of young Tom.
One of my favorite topics of your book, just because I'm such a huge fan of this style of golf, this pre-1900, this gutty style, smooth face irons, long nose woods, and teeing it up with sand and all that, is Tommy's swing, and you and I have collaborated a little bit on it, and this seems to be sort of maybe this is Freddy Tate, who was born in 1870, and which was the year that Tommy won the belt, and so he was a very young man, himself, but Freddy Tate was born that year, so I doubt he knew Tommy. But I'm sure since he grew up in Edinburgh and played at St. Andrews a ton. But if you could elaborate a little bit on the swing and the research of where you came up with, because you made some statements in there that he had a shorter backswing than the people of the day, including his own brother, who more or less James Ogilvy Fairley basically swung it sort of like John Daly with a bent left arm.
Well, he had that classical St. Andrews swing, that long, looping, leisurely swing where the club went all the way past parallel. And that was the style of the day when young Tommy came along. I want to be clear about the Freddy Tate thing, and we're going to get to that in a second. But the truth of the matter is that one of the big challenges about researching young Tommy is so little is written down about him or about the way he played. There are a few references in the badminton golf, in the golf book of East Lothian, and in one or two other places that escape my memory at the moment. And those describe the way Tommy played, and in particular, the way he drove the ball. And from those, you learn that he didn't have that long looping swing. He had more, they focused more, not so much on the backswing, they focused more on the fact that he had this lashing follow through type swing, and that he wasn't quite the long swingers, other that his focus was on lashing at the ball, and that he moved so far forward during his swing that his Glengarry bonnet often went sailing off into the crowd. The kind of image that called to mind to me when I was reading those documents at the very beginning was sort of Gary Player when he finishes his swing, almost feels like he's about to walk forward. And I felt like in that respect, it reminded me a little bit of what I think people described as being Tommy's swing, but there's not a lot of specific detail about it. And I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind is swing mechanics, the way that we understand them today, were not in the thought process of golfers in St. Andrews in 1870. They're generally held precepts such as keep your eye on the ball, don't press. That was one big precept. Don't try to swing too hard on any given swing. Of course, Tommy had absolute zero use for that. He went all out on pretty much every single swing. So, but I think really when you're reading about Tommy, the focus is on two things. The first one is his attacking style of golf, which was a very seriously radical change from the way the game had been played for almost all the centuries leading up to young Tommy. People played a style of golf that the Scots would call pawky. That's a real old Scots word, and it means cunning, sort of you can be cunning in a witty way, or you can be cunning in a strategic way. And then when applied to golf, it meant cunning in a strategic way. Alan Robertson was your classical pawky golfer. A pawky golfer played point to point, avoiding the hazards, making sure to get the proper figure on this hole, not necessarily trying to go super low, but trying to wear you down with consistency. And but Tommy had a whole different style. One of my favorite Tommy stories is from John Laidley, the great amateur of the 1890s and 80s. And he recalled as a young boy when he was going to school at Loretto in Musselburgh, going to the Musselburgh Links to watch some golf, and Tommy was playing. And of course, there's a hole there, and I won't remember this, James, because I'm not perfect on golf architecture and holes, where the road runs alongside the hole, and it was considered the biggest hazard of the hole. Tommy aimed at the road with the idea that if he hit the road dead center, the ball would get a lot more run on it and go running on down the road, and he could just deal with whatever lie came up when he found it there. But it would be farther down the course. And that absolutely blew away Laidley. He was like, all the other golfers are deathly afraid of this hazard, and Tommy's playing directly into the hazard to get the length and to gain an advantage in whatever way he thought he might. So he didn't know fear of anything. He just went after it every time. And that was the radical change to focus on. As far as technique is concerned, and as far as his game is concerned, the crushing thing about Tommy was putting. There's a lot more specific descriptions of the way he putted, with the club being dragged very close to his right foot and this and that he putted sometimes with the wooden putter if the greens were in pretty keen order, but he might also putt with his jigger. It was a sort of a thin face cliquey type thing that he would make bump and run shots with also, but he would putt with that if it was a rough surface or if he was well off the green and he wanted to kind of knock it on up there. So that was the devastating thing about him. And the thing to remember that sticks in my mind about that is he played a match against Bob Ferguson, who was one of the great Musselburgh players, of which there were so many. And he putted like a demon that day, sinking putts from all over the place. And he got so confident as the round went on that he just started saying, before his ball even got halfway to the hole, look at his caddy and say, pick it out of the hole, laddie. And then just walk over to where the next tee shot was going to be hit and wait for Ferguson. And of course it would go in, and of course his caddy would pick it up. And Ferguson almost had like post-traumatic stress from that. He gave an interview to a guy named George Colville about it. And you could see that he was just like, he was like Sham trying to keep up with Secretariat. And Sham never ran a single good race after the Belmont. And that was how he was a crushed animal. And Ferguson was a spiritually crushed golfer when watching Tommy do that. And that was the way it was against him in matches. He might get behind, and then all of a sudden the putts would start going in, and he would be sinking them from everywhere, and it would be dispiriting.
Wow, it's kind of like probably playing against Tiger in his prime.
Yes, I mean, I would say that in terms of clutch putters, Tiger. If you think about most of the immortal players, with the exception of Ben Hogan, and probably later in his career after he had tuberculosis, Harry Vardon. Most of them were pretty deadly putters from any reasonable distance.
Let's elaborate on that a little bit more. So let's leads into my next question. Obviously, Tiger is a.
Oh, James, can I stop you for 1 second? Because I never did get to your thing about Freddy Tate.
Okay.
So, in trying to decipher what Tommy's swing might have looked like, which is why I brought Freddy Tate up to you, because in the immediate aftermath of his death, the guys who were up and coming players in St. Andrews in the late 1870s and early 80s, naturally, they all were Tommy worshipers. He was like the mega superstar of the age, and he was becoming quickly a mythical figure. And a lot of them tried to imitate the way Tommy swang, and even to make their hats fall off and all this sort of thing. And so I think it's reasonable to believe that the longer hitters in St. Andrews probably evolved a swing that was at least similar to Tommy's. And I've always felt like, looking at those images of Freddy Tate's swing, that's probably a reasonable facsimile of what Tommy's swing might have looked like if there was any such thing as a picture of it. Maybe slightly longer than Freddie's, because obviously he's coming against the tradition of a 3 times longer swing than the one you see in that photo. But that was the reason I showed the Freddy Tate photos, because in my own mind, and obviously no one can really know this, no one has seen Tommy swing, and there's no perfectly clear descriptions of the way he swung the club. But that, to me, seemed like a reasonable possible evolution of the imitation of young Tommy. Go on to your next question. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
Yeah, I was just saying, let's go into the whole angle with obviously Tiger, but do you see any modern day other kids coming up today that stand out and leading the charge, and if so, do you have any interest in possibly kind of be like an O.B. Keller with Bobby Jones and ponying up to see if there's anything you could do to help spur that kid along to get them to the next level by writing about them?
Well, in answer to the second question, no. In answer to the first question, I like to write about the heroes of old. I feel like so many players have done so many great things that are completely forgotten. And I would like golfers to understand the history of their game a little better. And I feel like if you can tell it to them as a story, you have half a chance of getting them to read it and remember it, and to feel some connection with some of those older players. But I would say I haven't, modern day players, it's interesting because they're a little more automatons, than the players of the age that Tommy belonged to, and they're all very similar to one another. I feel like in their approach to the game, a lot of their swings are very, very similar. I feel like there's a lot of parity in the game and not right at the moment a standout player. If I had to name the player that I've seen at least on television during my lifetime, who reminds me in spirit, if not necessarily in technique of young Tommy, it would be Seve Ballesteros. You know, I think he had the same kind of fearless approach to golf that Tommy had, and the same magical ability to recover, and probably not quite the same putting ability as Tommy with the level of consistency that Tommy had, but on his day, he can be quite brilliant at putting could be quite brilliant at putting as well. So he was the person, I guess I would say spiritually, I think is most linked to Tommy among players that we could all remember.
Or maybe an Ian Poulter only in the Ryder Cup.
Yeah. Well, Ian Poulter putts Tommy like in the Ryder Cup. Of that, I would never, maybe not this most recent one, but in the past, he certainly has.
Well, he won his singles match. But so I loved how you came up with a lot of different things in there about, you know, where the term par came from, the bump and run shot, the Walter Hagen, you know, with pushing the boundaries of, you know, like a Tom Morris Jr. of pushing the boundaries of professional golfers. Can you add anything more to all these unique twists and turns you did in your book? There's so many golden nuggets in there. And if you want to elaborate on any others that I might have missed, or elaborate on how Tommy pushed the boundaries of professional golf, and maybe how it correlates to how Hagen also pushed the boundaries of professional golf for where we are today.
I'd be glad to. First thing is that, you know, one of the things that occurred to me in writing this book, and of course in trying to tell the story of the age in which young Tom lived, is that most modern players don't have any idea what golf was like then. They don't understand how foursomes were dominant. They might not even understand what a foursome is, for that matter. They don't understand that, you know, the way the golf was played then was so much different. The equipment, the rules, just all kinds of things. And so you find yourself needing, as you go along, to try to inform while you're entertaining, but not make it get too bogged down in that sort of thing. And that's part, I like to think of the art of it. The par thing was really interesting to me. And I think it's the one thing I would want to convey to the group here is par is such a modern concept. You know, the reason there was no concept of par is nobody played to put up a score. It didn't matter what number you got. It only mattered if it was a lower number than the person that you were playing against. You know, everything was a match. Stroke play was viewed as, you know, an unfortunate necessity on club medal days when everybody in the club was playing and you needed to have a result at the end of the day. But nobody played stroke play for fun in golf in the age of Tommy Morris and for some time after that as well. So that's why there was no concept of par. But when Tommy started putting up scores that people thought were crazy, then people started to talk about, well, what did represent perfect golf? You know, and the idea starts to come to the fore. And there was a very great old amateur golfer, a baker from Glasgow named William Dolman. And William Dolman had a brother named A.H. Dolman. And A.H. Dolman wrote often for magazines, as amateur golfers did in that age. Many, many amateur golfers did. And he did an interview with Davy Strath and Jamie Anderson, who was another great St. Andrews golfer and contemporary of Tommy's, and asked them what they thought represented perfect golf at Prestwick, where the championships were all played. And they came up with a score of 49. And so I wanted that to be known because of the, you know, compared to how Tommy, of course, shot under par in his first 12 holes on the last of his first of his 3 rounds to win the belt, which is something that was not even conceived of in that age. When Davey and Jamie were talking about this, it was some kind of a mythical ideal. It wasn't something the person would go actually do. And so I thought I got into that because I felt like that was An understanding of that was necessary for people to appreciate the magnitude of the score that he put up in that 1870 Open Championship, which, by the way, was never equaled so long as the championship was played at 36 holes, which was until 1892 at Muirfield. The second part of your question, James, if you'll remind me, was
Second part of the question was just how Walter Hagen and Tommy Morris.
Oh, yes. So this
pushed
is
the
a
boundaries.
critically important point as well, James. And, you know, when Tommy was playing golf, you got to keep in mind that tournaments were rare. They happened, the only one tournament was scheduled regularly, and that was the Open. Every so often, another club would have a tournament. There might be a professional event associated with the autumn or spring meeting of a big club, but they were erratic. The way that golfers made their money was playing as the partner of gentlemen in the foursome. So at St. Andrews or Prestwick or Musburg, there'd be foursomes every day. And Tommy would be recruited by an amateur who had big stakes to play as his partner. And so would another professional like Jamie Anderson on the other side. And so this is how they made their money, and they got a percentage of the winnings. But the way it worked was the professional called you, you came, there was no deal that was spoken of. You got 10%, usually if you won. If you didn't win, hopefully he was generous and gave you a tip, but he might not if you didn't win, and then you wasted your day. You weren't working in the shop, you were playing golf. Well, you probably not your whole day, it only took 2 hours to play golf. But so the way Tommy radicalized things, changed things there in a radical way, was that he made it known throughout St. Andrews that he did not, number one, he had a fee that you had to pay if you wanted him as your partner, period. And you had to pay it whatever the outcome of the match was. Now, to be honest, this was not a giant gamble, because if you had Tommy on your side, you mostly won. I think his winning percentage lifetime is around 60%. And in one-on-one matches, it's higher than that. But in any case, the fact that he set his own terms was very big step forward on the road to equality for golfers. And it's important to understand the reasons that Tommy was even in a position to do that. And this has a lot to do with his parents. Old Tom and young Tom, old Tom and Nancy, his wife, they set out from the very beginning to make Tommy a different kind of man than the caddies and professionals of his age. They sent him to the Air Academy, which cost a big chunk of their salary. Old Tom had the connections to make it happen because he was obviously the servant to the club that included all the very wealthy gentlemen, including the Earl of Eglinton, and those people helped get his son into the Air Academy. That's 3 miles from home. That's a long trip in those days. So Tommy had to go back and forth every day, 3 miles. So a lot of effort was expending in making Tommy an educated man. And he was extraordinarily rare in his time to be an educated man who was a ball maker. He wasn't a ball maker, but most of the ball makers and caddies were the men that were in the yard with him. They were not educated the way Tommy was. Tommy traveled with his friends, were people from Madras College and St. Andrews, and the people who eventually formed the Rose Club with him. But that gave him a different idea of his place in the world. And that is one of the reasons that he was able to make it known and make it stick that, I'm Tommy Morris and I'm different than these other guys. And if you want me, there's a different price and a different term.
It's interesting because there was one guy that seemed to own Tommy, and his name was Johnny Allen. And he's the only guy I noticed that actually beat him twice and he never played him. He just got beat by Johnny Allen twice. And it just,
Johnny Allen was his childhood pal from Prestwick.
Okay.
They had grown up together along with James Hunter, who eventually married Tommy's sister and became a wealthy timber baron in the United States. But Johnny Allen grew up as his father was a stonemason in Prestwick area, and Tommy and Johnny ran together when they were kids. And I'm sure that on the 2 occasions that are recorded, Johnny won. That's true. I'm sure there are many, many occasions when Johnny failed to win, but that's a claim to fame for him. He did beat Tommy one-on-one. He's one of the few people to do that. Bob Kirk is another. But yes, and they were buddies from a long time ago.
But that just leads into the whole your ability to chronicle stuff. How did you learn this skill? I mean, it's the research and the facts that you have about this. How did you learn that? And then, is this some part of your secret secret sauce techniques that you had in the book about talking about, Walter Hagen and Jesse James and Sevy and what was going on in the world at that time. Jesse James is in your book, and is that to lead people into because people know about Jesse James, and this might have been a way for them to reference, what was going on at that time, or is that a secret sauce technique you use?
I like to, one of the things I think is important is to sketch out things in the context of the time in which they occurred. It's often difficult for people to understand things in isolation. And I think one of the problems with golf history is a lot of it is written as isolated pieces about isolated things and isolated moments. And I think it's important that one of the reasons I like telling the stories the way I do, unfolding in real time, is that it's possible for you, the reader, connect the dots to see how this is happening within a larger world. Obviously Tommy's growing up in the late stages of the Industrial Revolution. That's radically changing life in Scotland and in England, all over Britain, politically, socially, in every way that you can think of, in terms of how people got their food, how much food they had to eat, all these things. These are all part of understanding how a person grows up, how they're becoming to think, so forth and so on. I like to do things like connect events in time. Like, I'm working on a piece now about a man named Arthur Lefevre, who's a club maker and golf professional in Scotland, England in the early 1900s, and he moves to Australia and makes quite a name and fame for himself there in Australia. But he arrives in Australia like a week after the sinking of the Titanic, and I couldn't help but note that in the story, because that's a major event that all people can place in time, and it gives you a sense of the era and a sense of connectedness. So those are things I like to do to try to help readers see how one thing connects to another. Like in the book, Sevy is mentioned because he's connected to Tommy spiritually in the way that we were talking about early. Walter Hagen is mentioned in his little antics at Deal, where he parks his chauffeur-driven limousine in front of the clubhouse and changes there when they refuse to let him use the clubhouse, is, in a way picking up the mantle from Tommy, saying, no, I have a price. And so I see how, I think it's important for people to see the longer term consequences of actions, how actions lead to other actions and other consequences. And that's why I like to try to connect things in time and in other ways.
Yeah, I love that about, getting into the political nature of your writing skills. I mean, here on page 64, you talk about the Chartist movement, which was happening because of the Industrial Revolution that led to the Representation of People Act of 1867, and how that kind of almost radicalized Tommy Morris Jr. and Davy Strath. And Tommy Morris Jr. at the time had to be like 15 years old, and it encouraged them to start their Rose Club Society, which was unheard of at the time for the up and comer educated young men of the day. And it's just I don't think it's fair to.
Well, I would, first off, a couple quick things there is that, clubs for people other than gentlemen had existed for a very long time. In 1853, I believe it was, old Tom founded the Mechanics Club there. Yeah. And he also helped start the one in St. Andrews. So there have been clubs for artisans and tradesmen. And the Rose Club is, I don't think so much is a radically political club type of thing as it was. Tommy traveled in a different social strata, and so did Davy Strath. Davy Strath was an educated man as well. He worked in a law office as a clerk, but he was a pretty smart guy and a very good reader. And so he was a person who had the possibility of moving on to higher levels of work in his office at one time. In any case, they didn't mix well with the caddies and the ball makers that would be their natural companions as golf professionals, because they were too educated, and they wanted to have a social circle that involved more educated men like themselves. And so it was principally members of the Madras College that formed the Rose Club. But Tommy was, he also joined, as did Davy. And obviously at that time that the Rose Club was formed, Tommy was an emerging superstar. And so it was pretty cool to have him in your club. And they had golf matches, and obviously they staged golf matches between Tommy and Davy, which were big attractions in St. Andrews and helped do a lot to promote the club. Probably the most famous thing they ever did was to stage a ball of their own right at the end of the season, in the same way that, and actually in the same hall that the Royal and Ancient used. Everybody probably used the hall. There probably weren't more than one hall in St. Andrews anyway. In the same hall that the Royal and Ancient had their annual ball in. It was quite a lavish affair for working class people, and that probably raised one or two eyebrows, but I don't think it was any kind of big radical event. It was just noteworthy in the sense that these were proud up-and-comers. You got to keep in mind it was a very big-time age of progressiveness. Progressiveness was the watchword of the age, and everybody was trying to improve themselves. If you went to the kirk on Sunday and heard a speech, the preacher speaking, he might be speaking about self-improvement and elevating yourself. So that was something pretty important in that time. And Tommy and Davy were just part of that larger effort to be progressive. And of course, many of you may know that the Rose is the national single of England. And England was, of course, the most progressive country in terms of leading the empire and having a lot of emphasis on, new inventions around the world with their world expositions and this and that and the other thing. And so a lot of the more forward-thinking people looked to England. Scotland was a little bit less forward-thinking in those days than England was, and that's part of the reason they named it the Rose Club.
That's awesome. But I want to move on to just a timeline of some superstars. So you have Tommy Morris Jr., who's obviously was Harry Vardon's hero, and Harry Vardon was obviously Bobby Jones's hero, and Bobby Jones was obviously Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer's hero, and Jack Nicklaus was obviously Tiger's hero, and Tiger was obviously one of my hero golfers, Justin Thomas. So, Andrea Kirkalady. Yeah. He was one of the people, as well as there were some other golfers that actually saw Tommy play in his prime and were able to live long enough to see Harry Vardon, James Taylor, and Braid play. And these three guys won a combined 16 Opens. And he said that he was better than all of them. It wasn't even a contest. He was better than all those guys. That's just fascinating. The golf genius. Can you elaborate on any of that?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Every single person who saw Tommy play and was asked about it, and there was more than just Andrew Kirkcaldy. Andrew Kirkcaldy, of course, was a very famous caddy and golfer in St. Andrews who went on to become professional at the Royal and Ancient after old Tom passed away in 1908. He was 15 years old when Tommy died, so he was a teenager, and he had seen Tommy play in St. Andrews and was well acquainted with them. Leslie Balfour Melville is another one. He was a great amateur golfer and sportsman, was a national champion in cricket, in rugby, in billiards, in skating, and he was just the classical all-rounder, as they called him in Britain, and also an amateur champion in 1895. William Dolman, that I mentioned before, who competed in every single one of Tommy's Opens, lived to be quite an old man, saw Harry Vardon and the great triumvirate, all of them, Kirkcaldy, all of them to a person agreed that not only was Tommy the greatest golfer they had ever seen, but he was the greatest golfer that the game would ever see. Bernard Darwin became quite good friends with Leslie Balfour Melville, as two amateur gentlemen naturally would. And one day he asked Leslie, as he put it tiresomely enough, if any of the other golfers were as good as old Tommy. And Leslie just answered straight up, "I can't imagine anyone playing better than Tommy did."
That's amazing.
It's an inconceivable thing. Andrew Kirkcaldy was like, "I'm often asked who is the greatest golfer I have ever known, and my answer is always the same. Young Tommy Morris, the son of old Tom, father of all of us professionals. Modern players ask me, surely, Andrew, he couldn't beat Vardon or Taylor or Ray." And I say to them, I have played most of the cracks at one time or another and beaten them all of them at odd times, but young Tommy had the gift of golf like no man I ever knew. It is my honest opinion that he was just a golf genius.
Gives me goosebumps. I tell you, it gives me goosebumps. And another thing, I think you could add Horace Hutchinson in there too, couldn't you? He was another person that saw them all and played
Yes.
against. Yeah.
He definitely played against them all, and he would not have played against young Tommy, but later this year, if you get through the green, probably early next year sometime, I'm going to do a piece in there about a match Tommy played in 1875 that involves Charles Blair McDonald, the father of golf in America, and a few other interesting characters, and that'll make for fun reading. So if you get through the green, which is the a journal of the British Golf Collectors Society. There's a British writer that I'm helping out on that piece, and that'll be in there sometime later in the year.
Well, I do. I
Next
have the
year.
Horace Hutchinson book coming tomorrow. So,
The
anyway,
Book of Golf and Golfers. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Reverend William Proudfoot. I always wondered because that's my signature. I always say far and sure, James. That's my signature.
Right.
Far and sure. And he's would you say he's credited with inventing that term, or was that
No, definitely not. He obviously used it a lot, as did many people, but that term is an ancient motto of golfers. The first reference to it that I am aware is from 1681. A match was played between the Duke of York and the Duke of one of the Dukes, between two lords of England and Scotland, which was reputed to be the first international match ever. The partner of the Scottish lord was a man named John Patterson, who was a shoemaker in Edinburgh and was reputed to be the best golfer in the region, and the Duke reputed him to play with him. And the English Duke bought somebody to play with him. And of course, the Scotsman won naturally. And the king gave James Patterson a huge sum of money from the lavish sum that the two dukes had bet against one another on this particular match, with which he built a home in Canongate in Edinburgh. And on that home is a big plaque installed there by the Duke, which the last words of it are far and sure.
That's awesome.
So it's an ancient expression.
Ancient, probably when they were inventing the feathery. If it was 1681, that's about probably when the feathery was coming on the scene.
1616 was when the feathery first came in. Before that, they used balls that were made of wood or horsehair or various other things. But 1616 is the first recorded instance of the use of a feather ball.
That's awesome. St. Andrews and Prestwick, are you, do you know anything about their membership, and are they keen on this? I know we have somebody on here from London on the call, and I know I sent to the secretary.
He's a trooper staying up this late, I'll tell you. Anyway, yes, I did go to St. Andrews when the book was published in 2019 in hardback. It's now out in paperback and easily accessible on Amazon.com to anyone who wishes to get it. I did go to St. Andrews, and I discovered when I was there, some of you may have seen the film St. Andrews, the greatest golf story ever told,
Yes.
shown on the Golf Channel and on Sky Sports in Britain. And I was fortunate enough to be filmed in that, talking about young Tommy. And the way that came about, I later learned, was that the last known descendant of old Tom is a woman named Sheila Walker, who lives in his house on the 18th hole at St. Andrews there part-time. She also has a place in Edinburgh. When I went there, I was privileged to have lunch with her and with my mentor and friend, Peter Crabtree, at the Royal and Ancient Golf Club. And she was quite fond of the book and apparently secretly arranged for me to be in that film and to speak at the Topping Bookstore, and apparently also to speak at the British Golf Museum, none of which I knew when I went over there, but I subsequently found out that she was like my secret admirer, I guess you'd call it, and has been very, very supportive of the book. Every person that I met in St. Andrews, which is a lot of wonderful historians and people, Peter Lewis, David Hamilton, Roger McStravick, they were all incredibly welcoming and very, very liked the book, and it's just a very warm reception there, and I had a wonderful time there. I haven't been to Prestwick since the book was published. I had gone there. I have since had communications with the archivist, because I wrote a piece for Through the Green about Tommy's score of 149, making the argument that it's the greatest single tournament round ever played. And that appeared in the September 2020 issue of Through the Green. And the archivist, Andrew Lockhead, helped me quite a bit with illustrations and for that piece and for getting Tommy's scorecard and a few other things that I needed for that. I mean, I obviously had all the information because I'd already done the book. But no, I'd been to Prestwick to play it before I wrote the book. Obviously, I went to the Air Academy. I went to Tommy's old houses everywhere he used to hang out, to the Red Lion Inn, to all those places to see them for myself before I wrote the book.
Well, it leads me into I'm actually going to contract. This is St. Andrew, or this is Prestwick routing on Google Earth, the original 12 holes, and I'm actually contracting a pretty well known guy to route it and put it on a simulator game. So hopefully we can't play the original thing, but the closest we can get is maybe play it on a simulator game that you'll be able to play on your PC or be able to play it in a golf simulator. So I'll have more details on that later, but I just want to let everybody know that. Last couple of questions I have are, tell us about your Hickory golf game. Do you play any pre-1900 golf like Tommy did? And are you pleased with the results of your book?
Well, let's take the second question first. The Tommy book has succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. First off, it got published. That right there was beyond my wildest dreams. I just wrote it because I wanted to do it, and I like writing, and I was hoping someone would like it when I finished doing it, and they did. So that was really great, and it's created a life for me as a golf historian that I very much enjoy, and I've met a lot of wonderful people, many of whom I see on this call, and played golf with them. So it's been just a grand experience in every single way. As for my Hickory game, I do play Hickory golf on a regular basis. Scott Peterson, who is on this call, was kind enough to connect me with a few Tom Stewart irons that I play with, and they're absolutely wonderful golf clubs. He also connected me with Jim Von Lasso, the great, who apparently is just an artist of a club maker and restorer, and he took a club head that I've been using on my desk as a paperweight for about 8 years and turned it back into a golf club, and that was fabulous. There's a Tom Stewart's famous pipe. And so I have the 2 Robert Simpson woods and 4 Tom Stewart irons and an old Brown Varden putter, and I go play with those. I play in I've played a couple Hickory rounds with like organized Hickory things in Florida, and of course the one at Latrobe. But mostly I just play with them in my regular Monday Stableford League. I made them let me get a Hickory target from a different tee than I play if I play modern clubs. So I can be modern Steven or I can be Hickory Steven depending on my mood that particular week. But I play Hickories a lot in that way. And I like the spiritual connection with the clubs. It's just something I never feel with a modern club. And so I play, mostly clubs that are turn of the century clubs. And some of you may know, and I do want to let you know that in June, I have another book coming out that'll be called The Long Golden Afternoon. And this is a story of what happens after the rise of young Tommy when the game moves to England and spreads around the world. And as with the Tommy book, it's told as a tale, and it focuses on the wonderful performances on the field that move the game forward by players like Freddy Tate, John Ball Jr., and people who's accomplished incredible feats that are sadly very mostly forgotten. So this is the story of the age of Hickory golf, really, the pre-war age primarily. Obviously, what James does is very, very ancient and original Hickory golf, and there's a wonderful that's wonderful. But I do think the majority of Hickory players probably play clubs that are pre-war clubs.
Yeah.
And anyway, I think that is one of the great glory ages of the game. And so I'm well on. Berlin has taken that book as well, and the same people that published the Tommy book will publish this. It's going to come out in June next year, and so yeah, just wanted everybody to know that.
Well, I would encourage you to come up and play at Foxburg, and if we get back to Oakhurst, I would encourage you to go there. But definitely come to Foxburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm sure Bern would love to host you up there. and get you up there to Foxburg, and I think you would really feel some special magic, because it's a fabulous, fabulous event put on by Tom Johnson.
Well, I will certainly look at that, and you never know what life holds. So, what I really want is questions from the gallery.
Hey, Badale, I have a
Badale,
question for you. What did you think of the Tommy's Honor movie that Jason Connery directed?
I love the film. I think the film, like many films, is wildly inaccurate, but it is a wonderful portrayal of the way golf was played in that age. That book is a little bit of a sensitive topic in the St. Andrews history community, which I learned. I read the book when it came out. Obviously, it was a little bit, I'm like, how can I be I have to be the most unlucky person in the world 6 or 7 years into gradual research on a book about one of the most obscure figures in the history of the game. And here I see on the shelf a book about that very same person. So it was kind of dispiriting when I first saw it on the shelf, to be honest. It's a wonderful read, I got to say. And there's a lot of research went into it. I don't agree with certain of the key conclusions that are drawn in the book, and emphasize even more greatly in the film. But I do think it's a wonderful portrayal of golf in the age in terms of the way it looked and the way it played.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Pete League. You got
I have to say, it's not a question, but a comment. Paraphrase the young kid talking about Bobby Jones. When he finished a round, he says, "Sir, you are a wonder." And that's what I'm saying about you. I think this is a well-spent hour or so of my time and everybody's time. Just fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Pete. That's very kind of you. Doug, Donna Land, you must not be Donna, but you're using your wife's computer, apparently.
You got that right, Stephen. Right on, right on. This was a real treat. I thank you very, very much. I wondered what assumption, of course, but how do you assume Tommy would have reacted to the opportunity to play golf in the U.S. had he lived longer?
Oh, I think Tommy would have relished something like that for sure. He would have had to live a very long time to do that, probably. But I'm sure he would have loved doing that. He was, I think, at base an adventuresome soul. He traveled quite extensively in England, which was difficult to do in that age, and also pretty expensive. But of course, Tommy was winning big money. He was a very wealthy man when he was like 18 years old by any standard that you could use. And it's interesting that when he got married, he rented a house for him and his bride on what is now known as Albany Place, One Albany Place there in St. Andrews. So if you ever go there, take a look at One Albany Place. And that's where he lived for a year with his wife before the tragedy that happened to her and to them both. But it was originally owned by a house of 6 and multiple servants. And it was just for him and his wife. And it was considered an outlandish display of money for a person who was born to the working class. And Tommy's actions were often viewed as a bit vulgar by the people in St. Andrews because he was kind of flashy with his clothes and with his money. But in every single age of history, people forgive the misbehavior of superstars. We've all seen that, right?
Very much, very much. On steroids, so to speak.
Yes.
Anyway, thanks very much.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Got a lot of new info that I didn't know before and some great stories. And I love the emphasis on putting. That was cool. So thank you so much. And I really agree with you about history. I think it's so important. I'm actually on the founding board of the LPGA Marilyn Smith Founders Legacy Foundation. We're trying to really get more information out about the founders and all of that. So one thing I just wanted to ask you was if you have done some research or could share something with us about some of the early women golfers, particularly in the 19th century or maybe early 1900s.
I'm so glad you asked
really
this,
great.
Jamie, because I have done a bunch of research on that. And I'm actually thinking of writing my next book about the early history of women's golf.
Oh, love it.
Based on a match that takes place in 1929 at St. Andrews between Glenna Collette-Vare, who is not yet Vare then, and Joyce Weathered. And through that vehicle, you could find a way of telling the story of the early growth of women's golf in the United States and in Britain. So I have in Britain, of course, women's golf. There's some about this in the upcoming book. But women, the early organization of the Ladies Golf Union in 1893, which was facilitated by William Laidlaw Purvis of the Royal Wimbledon Golf Club and a number of other prominent people such as Harry Everard, the historian, and so forth. They formed a union for ladies golf in 1893 because there's a growing number of golfers, particularly mostly in England, who were women golfers, and there are a growing number of golf courses for women. And so they staged their own national championship starting that year. And Margaret Scott was the winner for a number of years. She was from the same family as the Honorable Osmond Scott and other great golfers. And she was an extraordinary player, put up extraordinarily low scores. And there were a number of other really great golfers that followed her, women golfers, Cecil Leach. And as I mentioned, Joyce Weathered, who I personally believe to be the greatest woman golfer ever to play. And she had a number of great matches with Bobby Jones and various other things. So there's a fascinating history of women's golf, and I'm really giving serious thought to making that my next project. Obviously, it's always hard to sell books about golf, and I worry a little that it might be pretty difficult to sell a book about women's golf. But sometimes you feel like you just do it because I mostly do the things I feel like doing, honestly, without so much regard for whether they'll get bought or not. And
There's a
Eric,
book-
Lucy had a question.
There's a book, real quick. There's a book coming out, or it's out, about Marion Miley, who was in the 1920s, 1930s, who was tragically killed. And so there's a book about that Tava's going to do a thing with.
Okay,
Well,
and
I'm
Eric,
going to say
Lucy,
that'd be awesome if you do, and we'd certainly be glad to help you, in terms of getting it out, and would love to, maybe.
yeah, no, I
talk
never
about
have
it.
any trouble getting people to help me. That's for sure. So I'm grateful for Jamie, and grateful for your question. Eric, you've been waiting patiently.
Oh, no, it's all good. First a comment and then a question. I fortunately have been to St. Andrews a couple of times, and the last time was in 2012, and had arranged to have David Joy come as old Tom Morris to our group. And I'm telling you, not a dry eye in the room. And I finished your book last week, and that I got at the convention. And it gave me that same level of emotion that I got back then in 2012. And so I think a lot of people could probably relate to that after reading that book, because old Tom does get all of the press, if you will. So to really get more in depth on young Tom, you did a fabulous job. You've done a lot of research. Is there any place in the US that has some history of young Tom that you ran across, or did you have to get all your research primarily over in St. Andrews?
All my research was done over there. And so all the records of young Tommy are there. He never played anywhere other than Scotland or England. So yes, I did. And thank you very much for your kind words. I'm so happy that you enjoyed the book. I loved writing it, and I'm glad that you liked reading it. Mr. Webster, with whom I have played a round of golf. How are
Steve,
you?
do you remember that?
Of course I do. It was at Mount Dora. I played horribly, and you still yet wish to speak to me.
And I got your book at the Winter Park Hickory
Yes,
tournament.
I remember
You
that too.
autographed
Yeah, I remember
me.
that.
Hey, this is arcane stuff. I just got back actually from Scotland. I missed the Pittsburgh event because I was over there. St. Andrews, I played Prestwick for the first time. This is arcane stuff. So I played North Berwick for the first time in my life a couple of weeks ago. Such a cool place. Some of the sources, like in the Tommy's Armor book, suggest the big money match against Willie and Mungo Park.
Right.
And it comes down to 36 hole match, etc. The telegram that comes to North Berwick.
Yes.
That young Tommy's wife, Margaret, has gone into labor and she's not doing well and they need to return immediately. Like the Tommy's Armor book and some other sources suggest that the telegram reaches old Tom while the match is going on, and that Tom, this was actually in the Tommy's Armor book, that old Tom has to make the decision. Do I tell young Tommy, knowing he'll immediately cease the match and we'll forfeit all this money and we can't get back to St. Andrews anyway? It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, et cetera, et cetera. And your book intimates the news doesn't reach them until the 36th hole. The match is over. They win by 1 hole. And then, as we know, that a patron, I guess, of North Berwick offers his yacht to sail them back.
There's multiple accounts of that match. None of them that I have read anywhere ever suggest that there was a telegram that was received during the course of the match. So as far as I'm concerned, that isn't so. The telegram came after the match. It is true that 2 telegrams came is after they had started to sail away. It was J.C. Lewis who lent his yacht, by the way. He was a member at North Berwick and a very well-to-do man. And he sailed them on his yacht into the harbor there at St. Andrews. Even that, that's a dangerous nighttime voyage that even the ferry wouldn't take. And takes 6 hours easy to get across in decent weather, and worse if it's bad weather, which it wasn't great weather. But in any case, the second telegram did come after they had sailed away, but were still within reasonable hailing distance. So in other words, they could have shouted for them to come back. The second telegram informed them that, in fact, both Margaret and the baby were dead. But the people on the shore elected not to hail them, feeling that it was best if they sailed on for themselves. That is what I know to be true. I've never seen anyone, and the source that I trust the most is Tom Morris of St. Andrews, The Colossus of Golf. And if you haven't read that, that is the greatest biography ever done of a figure in golf, period. And there's no comparison. The amount of research that went into that book staggers the imagination. David Malcolm and Peter Crabtree, poor David Malcolm is late of this world, sadly, spent 17 years researching that book. They turned over every single stone, parish records. I once called Peter Crabtree on the phone to ask him about the degree to which the Rose Club or anything Tommy did was a comeuppance to St. Andrews members, in particular because of things that I had read in Tommy's honor and just things that I hadn't come across myself, and I thought Peter might know something that I didn't know. And his response to me was that I've read every single letter written by a member of the Royal and Ancient from 1840 until the present, and none of them ever mention anything in terms of disrespect from Tommy or anything like that. So he describes the outcome in his book with the 2 telegrams, the one coming after the ship had sailed, and that's what I believe to be the truth. That's what's said in the newspapers. I don't know where this other report comes from. Honestly, I've never seen any evidence of it. Tommy's honor does not cite sources in the back in the way that an academic book would. So it's not possible for you to know the answer to that question as far as where it was that he seems to have seen it. So it's unknown to me. And if there are things I haven't read about Tommy Morris Jr., I'd be shocked beyond words. But in any case, I suppose it's always possible.
I loved your book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes, Sarah and Joe, lower left.
Yes, thank you for it was a wonderful session. Really enjoyed it greatly. I just have one question, which, again, this is kind of way out there, but in the movie, it seems to imply that he died of alcohol poisoning.
No, that's not true either. No.
What did he die from? That's what I'd really like.
Okay, so when Tommy died, an obituary was written for the family by a man named James Denham, who was a close family friend and was a real aficionado of golf and kept records of all the golf. He had actually been injured in a train accident, couldn't really play golf himself, but he still loved it, kept all kinds of records about it and so forth. And he wrote the obituary on behalf of the family. The obituary reports that Tommy died of an aneurysm in his lung. All right. The coroner's report, of course, all deaths will have a coroner's report that goes with them. That's a matter of public record that any person could look up, including any of you. And the coroner's report on Tommy's death was given by David Malcolm and Peter Crabtree to a number of extremely prominent physicians in St. Andrews and elsewhere for them to look at it and deliver their opinion. At the time I wrote the Tommy book in hardback, and it's been updated in the paperback, the only conclusion that I was aware of was the one that Peter chose to use in his book, which was that the chief physician of the Department of Surgery there had concluded that Tommy had one of the main arteries to his heart burst in his sleep, causing instant death. David Hamilton, who I had the pleasure of meeting in St. Andrews, was a physician, one of the pioneering kidney transplant doctors, actually. And he was among the doctors who was asked by Peter Crabtree to look at the inquest. And he told me that a number of them, himself included, were of a different opinion, which is that Tommy died most likely of a giant tubercular hemorrhage in the nighttime. Tommy, as he would say then, if you hear hoof prints, it's probably a horse and not a zebra. And his point was that tuberculosis was rampant in St. Andrews. Not very many years after Tommy died, his very best friend, Davy Strath, died of tuberculosis in Australia after sailing there on his doctor's advice. He made it to Australia, but he didn't live another 2 weeks, and he's buried there. And so they traveled together a lot. They more than likely roomed together. Tuberculosis is incredibly contagious. So it's equally likely, in his opinion, that it was a tubercular hemorrhage. But it's definitely some sort of arterial hemorrhage in the night that kills him. His brother John, who was the one who was a paraplegic and was confined to that trolley that old Tom made for him, also died in a similar way a few years later. So it might well have been a congenital condition, or it could have been that John also got tuberculosis. Everyone, lots and lots of people did, and were dying from it like crazy. So he definitely he drank. Everyone who was a caddy drank. Everyone who was a ball maker and professional golfer drank, and they probably had their fair share of pints. I don't have any doubt of that. But Tommy by no means drank himself to death. That's ludicrous. Any other questions? You guys have been awesome. You've been a very great audience. Oh, Frank.
Hey, Stephen, thank you. You'd mentioned that Tommy's feats were a cause for popular growth of golf throughout the United Kingdom. It was also true of Francis Ouimet here in America after the 1913 U.S. Open.
Oh, absolutely.
Both
the history of golf is defined by big events like that, honestly. That's how the ball moves forward.
Fair enough. And both were from the working class.
Yes.
And it occurs to me that parallel was an important one in the popular acceptance of the game. And it's spread to people beyond the aristocracy, if you will. Would you agree with that assessment? And do you see any other parallels between the two?
I don't see any other parallels between the two, but I definitely agree that the fact that it was a breakthrough by a member of the working class naturally has the effect of making the game more popular among the working class. That was true in Britain as well, in England, more so than Scotland. Of course, in Scotland, everyone played golf, so it wasn't a question of interesting the working class per se. They already played. They just had a hero in Tommy, and of course, old Tom before him and Alan before him. So there were always heroes from the professional class in Scotland. When the game moves to other countries, the same pattern happens. The gentlemen, the wealthier men, take it up first, and it's a while before the game spreads to classes of ordinary citizens that aren't as wealthy and privileged. And that, of course, has been one of the things that's dogged golf as a game throughout history, this elitism thing. But that's usually how it travels. And when it first went into Britain, the only people who played golf in Britain were gentlemen who were members of clubs. There was no working class tradition of it. Kids that grew up there played cricket, or they played rugby, or football or soccer, like we'd call it. But so it definitely made a big difference when working class people started winning. 1894, John Henry Taylor becomes the first Englishman and the first professional to win an Open championship at Sandwich there, where the Open was played most recently. And that is a very big event for English golf because of the fact that it's a working class professional winning, and that and the rise of Harry Vardon and other things helped to spread the game among the working classes and lower classes of Britain in an important way. And it's certainly true of Francis Ouimet.
Thanks, Stephen.
Could
Yes.
you re-mention the name of your upcoming book and when it's available?
Yes, it's called The Long Golden Afternoon, and it's coming out in June of 2022 from Berlin Publishers in Scotland. Long Golden Afternoon is a phrase I stole from Bernard Darwin. I feel if you're stealing, steal from the best. That's the way I look at it. Anyway, when the war is declared, he says, and then came the war and the long golden afternoon was over. And so I thought, given that this is a book about the age before the war, that would be a wonderful title, and that is the title.
Awesome. We look forward to it.
Stephen Proctor, you nailed it. We have two goals when we originated the Grand Zoom series, to entertain and to educate. And my friend, you absolutely did both with class, style, and it was so much fun to have you tonight. So I want to thank James and I want to thank you. And if James has any closing comments, he ought to be the guy to make the closing comments.
Well, I just appreciate it, and I'm humbled that we have such people in our organization. And
I've been a member for a number of years because I like your magazine as well. And James Davis does a wonderful job editing that magazine. And I had a wonderful lunch with him at the convention. And of course, I'm still deeply, deeply grateful to Jim for the review of my book that I consider to be the smartest and the best that I got from anyone who reviewed the book worldwide. So I have a great deal of gratitude toward Jim and toward the GHS for that.
And I just truly appreciate this organization and the enthusiasm for everything about our history and the things we can do together and accomplish together, and to have people like you involved with this organization just takes it to a whole nother level, because it definitely tickles my ivories in terms of what I really love about this game. And Tommy Morris is, Scott Lehman asked on LinkedIn who your dream foursome would be. And, if I had a dream foursome, it'd be Tommy Morris Jr. would be number one, Bobby Jones and Justin Thomas. Even though I've played with Justin, I'd still like to have him in that group. But I just, the beginning of golf to me and the end of golf it's just been a pleasure. And I love your whole style and how your approach and your chronicalization, and I just love it all. And it's just fabulous. And I just can't wait till your next books come out. It's just going to be even more that I think the GHS can do to help you promote it. And the fact that you're educating us is worth every penny. So it's priceless.
Well, I'll be delighted to come back at any time. I always enjoy doing a thing like this. The whole point of reading all these things is to share them with other people who enjoy the history of the game. So I'm always happy to do that. And I hope you will have me back.
But thanks everybody for this call, and George for putting it on, and Bern for hosting and everything. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, guys. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank
Very
you.
good.
Bye-bye.
Well
Thank you.
done.